So my name's Josh Clifford, kind of like a big red dog. So I'm just appreciative that you guys let us come up and would let us speak to you guys. It's pretty cool to be able to share some time with some other believers and share mutual encouragement from each other's faith. And so now I'll just tell you guys kind of the story of how Jesus has changed my life through using the people that he's put in it and what he's done. So I was born on May 27th, 1995 to a couple named Scott and Jane Clifford. I was the first of three boys. And so as you can imagine, my parents got a ton of sleep and time for themselves. But we grew up in a family with a lot of, I would say, evangelical morals. We went to church on Sundays, most Sundays, and we would pray over our food. I kind of knew what was like right and wrong in God's eyes, at least according to my parents and what they believed, and my pastor believed. And we professed Jesus. And so that was kind of the lifestyle that we lived. But I think that some of the false gospels that pervade our society today were also had kind of infiltrated our family, and it was really all I knew. In these gospels, there were things like the gospel of consumerism, or the gospel of cheap grace, as well as the gospel of prosperity, and these things kind of muddied the waters for me, and who Jesus really was. I don't know, maybe some of you can relate, but even the apostles had to combat some of these. If you look at Jude verses 4 and 5, Jesus's brother was already battling some of the false gospels of his day, namely the cheap grace gospel in those verses. And I think that the gospel I understood was, at very best, not the full counsel of God, and at very worst, I think it was probably a false gospel. In Acts 20:27, Paul says, "I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole counsel of God." And so I think in my life that wasn't true. I hadn't really known how to get to myself. 2 Corinthians 11:4 talks about how if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. I think the gospel that I understood was definitely a different gospel from the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is the one Jesus preached. And so this was reflected by the way that I lived. I think that misunderstanding Jesus's message and mission is pretty fatal for Christians, and will definitely direct their lives in the wrong path. In my college years, as I started to get older and make decisions as college students do about how they want to live their life, I found that I was getting frustrated with the idea of being a Christian. I was a Christian, as Matt said, really in name only, and I realized that there was really no purpose in my life. I didn't really have an end goal, and that was pretty empty for me, knowing that I kind of tried to ignore it and fill it with idols. But even those, I bounced around from one to the other, and really not be able to find anything that was fulfilling. And what was even worse was that people thought I was doing really well as a Christian. I'd have the older people in the church, you pinch your cheeks and, oh, how good it is to have, a young man who loves Jesus in the church. But yeah, inside I'm empty and I don't really know who Jesus is. And I was frustrated because the motivational speakers I was listening to were having really more of an impact on my life than the gospel was. And I wasn't really willing to admit that, but I just felt like the gospel didn't have any power in it. And I think that I was like the person that it talks about in Isaiah 5:18 and 19, that it says, "Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of falsehood, who draw sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him be quick, let him speed his work that we may see it." I was drawing my sin as with cart ropes, slowing me down as a follower of Jesus. At least I thought I was. and yet asking, why won't God work in my life? And why won't he be quicker with his work? And that led me down a tough path where in my college years, around junior year, started to make some decisions to do the things that college kids do. And I will spare you the details, but I was not living for the Lord. And it became very apparent at that point, once I kind of reached the tipping point of what I knew I was allowed to do and what I wasn't allowed to do. So I kind of towed the line for a while, and then I couldn't anymore. I couldn't deny that I was living a hypocritical lifestyle. And I thought of myself as like one of the Pharisees. And so I kind of had to decide, like, do I want to drop this Christian thing, or do I want to live for the world? And ignorant as I was like, I do want to serve the Lord, but I had no knowledge of how to do that. So I was like, well, how does one do that? Well, Christians read their Bibles. So it's like, I'll try to start reading my Bible. And I knew that I couldn't hold myself accountable to do that. So I got my friend Max, and I said, I'll wake up at 4, and you wake up at 4:30. I'll be at your house, and we'll read the Bible together, and then we'll play some basketball before work. And we did that for a few months during the summer. I really didn't know how to do it. I was like reading like 2 or 3 verses in Romans and like thinking about it for 5 minutes and then being like, Max, what do you think? And I was, Romans is a relatively confusing book, especially if you only read 2 or 3 verses at a time. So that was a relatively difficult task, and I got frustrated with that too. And so I kind of stopped trying that. But I think that this was the point at which I believe it's Isaiah 66:2. I could be wrong on that. It says that God says, "I am the Lord," or sorry, "all these things my hands have made, and so all these things came to be," declares the Lord. "But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit, and who trembles at my word." And I think at that point, God had finally humbled me enough, given me a little bit of reverence for his word, and allowed me to then have some people in my life to help me stop being so ignorant. And so during this time in the summer, there was a guy at my gym. His name is Jay Frisbee. And Jay, he came up to me, and I kind of known him as an acquaintance a little bit. And he was like, "Hey man, would you like to get coffee sometime?" I was like, "Well, he has a wife, so he's probably gay." Sure. I'll get coffee with you. I guess. I don't really know why, but I'll get coffee. And so I attend coffee with him, and he is just, if you know him, an absolute total evangelist. He's like an Acts 28:31 guy who's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance, like all boldness. The guy can talk to a rock about Jesus. It's just super inspiring and super convicting at the same time. And so when we were there, he started talking about Jesus, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian too," And he was like, "Well, cool. Would you like to come to this Bible study that I'm going to?" And it was actually much like this one, very similar. And he, when I was invited there, I started going for a little bit during the summer, and I saw like, man, there's some, I wouldn't have been able to articulate this at the time, but there's some mature Christians here. Like there's some people, they know the word, like they're like holding each other to accountable to it, like, and they're like, people of like all ages, including mine. Like, where do you find these people? Because I didn't really know where they came from. But I still hadn't really figured much out about that yet, and really hadn't been asking the right questions. So I ended up that fall going back to school. I went to Bridgewater State University, just south of Boston. And that was about an hour from where my parents and that Bible study were. And I kind of went full-fledged back into idolatry. So really this time idolizing more success than anything, because I figured out some of the other stuff like had failed. And so I was like, this time I will be successful. And when I went there, I was taking 18 credit hours at Bridgewater State University. That was the max they would let me take, or else I would have taken more. I was also had an internship with a strength and conditioning program up there that was at a high school, and then I was 15 hours a week, as well as I worked at Ruby Tuesdays another 15 hours a week. So I was like swamped. I had maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night. Really was doing like running across campus trying to get stuff done. So I didn't have much time. Just idolizing success. And but one night I received a group text from Evan and Kayla, and they said, "Hey, this guy Cecil's coming up, and he's going to share with us about Jesus. We'd love to have you." And I was thinking about it. And, I was like, "Well, I have a lot of homework to do," but I was like, "Oh, I'll just go." And I'm really glad that I did, because that night I got to go to what they would call like a rally. Some of you were kind of able to go to the Mike Chong rally last week. It was kind of like that, a little bit smaller. And Cecil was speaking, and one of the things that he spoke on is kind of his thing he does a lot, is talking about how when you read the word, you need to go to the commander-in-chief, which is God, and really spend time with him to understand what his orders are for you. And not worry about what the people down here, whether it be like a pastor, an evangelist, somebody else, your parents, have to say about God, but go directly to him through the word. And he said, like, when you read, don't think about what anyone else has told you. Think about what the pastor's saying himself. And so one of my questions was, like, I asked him, how do you do that? Because like when I read, which was very like little, but when I did read, I would find that I would just kind of think about the sermons I've heard on that passage before, and what someone else would say about it. And what he had to say about that was, you have to immerse yourself in the word. And so I'll come back to that in a minute, because that'll be important. But yes, you have to immerse yourself in the word. And so after this Bible study, there's this other Jay. God seems to use Jays in my life, Jay Preckle. And Jay Preckle, he's asking me some questions. Who's investing in your life? How's your time in the word? And I had like zero answers to any of these questions. And so he kind of realized, like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not a disciple. So he calls Evan over, and Evan is like the leader of this Bible study. And he asked Evan, "So what do you think about Josh's life and where he's at right now?" And Evan says something that I will never forget. I'll always appreciate him for. He said, "Josh is treading water, and if he doesn't do anything quick, he will drown." Like, I'm standing right here. And so that was kind of shocking. But at the time, even though I was shocked by it, I was a little relieved that someone could see through all of that, because people were telling me that I was doing really well, and yet I wasn't. And so I needed help. So like, well, if this guy can figure out that I'm drowning, maybe he can help me swim. So that's what I asked him, how do I swim? Luckily, he's a Coast Guard rescue swimmer, so he's very great with that kind of stuff. He asked me, how much time do you have? I was like, well, if you heard what I just said a minute ago, I didn't have much time at all. Taking a ton of credit hours, working 2 jobs, and well, I might be able to get time and all that. And so we started to get time on the weekends, and within the week, I quit my strength and conditioning internship. I stopped doing that, and I also quit my job. And really, the focus of that was I wanted to get more time with Evan, because even though I didn't know why I was supposed to be getting time with Evan, I knew he's had something that I did. And I think that this was something that God was looking for from me, and wanted, was quick obedience. One of the stories I really like that I think we kind of missed because of the chapter divisions is Luke 9:57 through Luke 10:2. And so in Luke 9:57, he starts by, there's a few people that are asking to follow Jesus, and so they're like, "Hey, I'll follow Jesus. I'll follow you, Jesus." But Jesus says, "Look, birds of the air have nests, and foxes have holes. I don't have a place to lay my head." So the implication is that the guy probably, like, I'll reconsider that. Checks out. The next guy comes up and it's like, "Hey, Jesus actually tells him to follow. And then it's like, well, let me first bury my father. And Jesus is like, let the dead bury their own dead. As for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. It's just crazy. Like, I don't know, just makes me think, a casket's probably, 100 shekels of silver, and pallbearer is probably 30. But the look on his face when Jesus said that, priceless. MasterCard. You didn't see that commercial. And so it just really tough. And then, the next guy comes to him, and Jesus basically tells him that, you can't go back to your family. If you put your hand to the plow and look back, you're not fit for the kingdom of God. And so he turns away 3 people. And then 2 verses later in Luke 10:2, he's telling his disciples, pray for laborers in the harvest, because the harvest is plentiful, but laborers are few. And I'm thinking, if I'm a disciple, I'm like, what about the 3 guys you just turned away? Like, these guys could have been laborers with us. But I think he wants to see someone who is going to be quick to obedience. And so I was really fortunate that, Evan had that to say to me that night, and that I was able to kind of get out of my commitment to the Dunkin' Donuts and the strength and conditioning, Ruby Tuesday. I had too many jobs. And so I began to reprioritize my life to be able to get time with him. And I would basically just go down on the weekends. I would spend all day Saturday, sometimes the night Friday as well, and all day Sunday with he and his wife, Kayla. And I kind of likened it to like a boxing match. It was like I would spend 5 days at the school trying to like labor with what little knowledge I had, talk to people about Jesus on the campus, have my quiet time, do the things that I was being taught, and then have my 2 days back at home, resting, getting time with Evan and Kayla, and learning from them. And they were just such a blessing in my life. It was really cool to be able to learn from them. But I think what some of the biggest things that I learned from them can be kind of summed up in Luke 8:1. I really like Luke 8:1. It says, soon afterwards, he went throughout all the cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with him. And when I think about that verse, first of all, he showed me what the true good news was, not this false good news of Jesus that I had learned in my past, but the true good news. And the way that I learned that was, first of all, by immersing myself in the Word through what Cecil had to say. And so he taught me how to read the Bible for real this time, how to get in it and get something out of it. And I ate it up. I loved it. I couldn't get enough. I'd read in the mornings, and then, I started later. I, wanted to read in the mornings and at night. And I was like, well, I can read during lunchtime too. And just, whenever I can read, we can read. And it was just really exciting to me being taught how to get time with the God of the universe and learn what he has to say to me and learn what his true message is. And then, being able to see it in his life, I think was the next thing that was really big. Was you hear about the kingdom life, you hear about what it looks like to live a gospel-centered, spirit-filled life. What does that mean? And when you only see people on Sundays, or if your family isn't really living it out, then seeing what that practically looks like is really hard, especially when it's, the story of the Bible was placed 2,000 years ago. So figuring out that out is difficult to do alone. So being able to see that in front of me, how Evan he would sacrifice his time for me. Let me stay over his house over the weekends and spend time with me. He had other guys who spent time trying to help them grow the faith. He would, help me, financially be able to be a part of what they were doing. Because I was a poor college kid, I couldn't afford anything. And just to see, what a healthy couple looks like. My parents got divorced when I was like 20. And I love my parents. I think they really tried to, show me the way of the Lord. But it was cool to see, from a different perspective, what kind of a healthier marriage looks like. And another thing was like how they spent their time. Like when they would get home, their first thing was like talking about, Jesus, talking about their quiet times, talking about the people they're investing in. Whereas like my family, we kind of worship the household idol, also known as the television. And so we kind of had this, we had like 4 TVs in the house. They're like constantly on, and we didn't know how to have a conversation with each other. Nothing wrong with TVs, I like it every once in a while, but like Evan and Kayla were super radical in that. So when I actually eventually went back home to my parents' house for 6 months before I moved to Ohio, I was like, it was a shock to me seeing the difference between the way that Evan and Kayla lived and the way that, I lived all my life up until that point. I didn't realize how unhealthy it was. And so it was cool to see the kingdom life lived out in front of me. And I just am forever grateful to Evan and Kayla for their investment in me, because without that, I wouldn't have ever gotten off the ground. And one of the things that I still kind of think about to this day is I remember Evan, I think he like, he was, charged me like super cheap rent and really helped me out financially, because even I would go there on the weekends, and then I eventually lived with them for a couple of months before they moved. And I just told him I appreciated him letting me have him in his home. And he said, all I ever ask is that you do for someone else what I've done for you. And, that still kind of gives me chills. Just if I were to ever stop, living the Christian life, as Grant said in his testimony, I have to apologize to a ton of people, and Evan and Kayla included. And so that always encourages me, remembering what they did with me, and that all he expected was that I do that with somebody else. And so after 8 months with them, they ended up leaving. They went to Mobile, Alabama, because the Coast Guard was stationing them there in Mobile. And so they went down there. And for the next 6 months, I was with Christian and Jay, which were a couple of other guys in their ministry that they had, along with myself, that we were laboring together, along with their wives, Marissa and Nakia. And it was really cool getting to labor with them. It's actually interesting. We're kind of scattered like to the 4 winds, the ends of the earth, the ends of heaven. We got Christians now in LA, and Evan and Kayla are in Mobile, and then Jay is still on Cape Cod, and now I'm here. So you kind of got, Pacific West and South, East Coast, and now Midwest. I feel like I should feel like I got the short straw, because it's probably like the least notoriety of a place. But I kind of feel like I got the long straw, because man, the training here that I've been able to get is just awesome. So I'm higher on Ohio than I thought I would. So in that time, though, in between Evan and Kayla leaving and me going to the next place, I had this decision to make of where do I want to continue my training. And it wasn't do I want to continue my training, but where. I didn't feel like there was anyone in Massachusetts that could mentor me in the same way that I had with Evan. And I wanted to continue to have somebody invest in me, because I knew it was to be hard to live this out over the long haul if I didn't have that. So they've presented a couple of options to me. They presented, there was a couple in California that's super cool that I love. And then they also said Ohio here with David Perry, who is mentoring us down there in Rio. And it was actually relatively quick that I decided between the two of those. I knew I couldn't go to California, which was just something in me. I knew that the decision had to be specifically about Jesus. It couldn't be about anything else. It had to be about Jesus and Jesus only. And I'd always wanted to live in California. I'd actually thought about transferring out from my school and going to UCLA Long Beach, and then found out how expensive it was and decided not to. And so I wanted to, go to California for so long. I knew that it would be easily distractible. And I thought, well, what's in Ohio? No distractions. I think was it Mark Twain? I forget who it was, said that if there's ever an apocalypse, I'm going to Ohio because everything happens in Ohio 10 years later. So, really. And so but I was also presented with the opportunity later on when they found out they were going to Alabama. I was like, well, wow, I should maybe go with them to Alabama. And so it was between Alabama and Ohio. And I really wasn't sure. I kind of felt, I felt strongly about both. I really wanted to be both places. And so I had to pray through it over a period of time. I took a couple of months. And one night I took a prayer walk. And the reason I wanted to pray all night, because in Luke 6:12, it says that Jesus prayed all night. And so I wanted to do what he did. And that was when he was deciding who his disciples would be. So a very big decision. So now I was basically deciding who I would be a disciple of, in some senses, disciple of Jesus regardless, but who was going to lead me in this next stage of life. And so I started at Sandwich High School. Yes, the town was named Sandwich. And yeah, like spelled just that way too. And I walked through the town at night. I didn't have my cell phone. I don't know why. I was walking, at midnight with no phone. But I wanted to go from dusk to dawn. So I started when my phone said the sun would set. I wanted to try to get to 5:30 when the sun would rise. And as I was out there, I didn't get like a revelation from God, and he didn't tell me anything. Even after that, even when I made the decision, it was a decision that I kind of still had to make for myself. But I remember I was walking up the Sandwich Boardwalk. The boardwalk is this area. There's like a bridge you can jump off of for fun. In the high tide, it's safe to jump off of. And there's a beach that it leads up to. And as I'm walking up here and I'm about to get up to the beach, I hear footsteps behind me, and I'm like, who is this crazy person who's up at like 11 p.m. walking on the beach? And I was like, I'm also too. So, and so I turn, and this person starts talking to me, and it's really dark, but I could kind of tell there was some lights off in the distance, so I could tell it was like a girl my age. And she was like, hey, what are you doing out here? And I'm like, this is not what I came out here to do. And so we start talking for a little bit, and just small talk. And she's like, what are you out here for? Prayer walk, just making a big decision. And I was like, well, what are you out here for? And she was like, well, I'm having some relationship troubles. And now I'm really in over my head. Well, I don't know what to do here, man. I gotta get out of here. But I was like, well, what have I been doing all night? Would you like to pray about it? You could pray if you'd like. She's like, yeah, sure. And so we prayed a little bit. And as I finished, I could just kind of tell, again, super dark, and kind of hardly see her. But I could tell she was crying. And she just said, hey, thanks, I needed that. Appreciate that. And as I walked away, I didn't know what to do. I was like, well, nice meeting you. I hope everything works out. But one of the things I failed to mention before was that just before that, I had been asking God to send a messenger to tell me where I was going, whether it be a person, an angel, I don't care. Tell me where I'm going. I don't want to have to make a decision. And I didn't really process it this way at the time. I could be totally wrong and interpret the situation completely wrong. But the way I kind of interpreted that situation over time was that it seemed like what God wanted to communicate through that was, I'm not going to send you a messenger. You are my messenger. And wherever you go, I'm sending you to be my messenger. So make the best use of the time. It talks about it in Ephesians, that look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And so I wanted to know what the will of the Lord was, whether it be for me to go to Alabama or Ohio. And I think God was saying, my will is make the best use of the time wherever you're at. Now, I still think it was narrowed down to where God those two places. I do think it needed to be about Jesus. But whichever I picked, it was going to be, I'm okay with that. You're going to make a big boy decision. You're going to be an adult, and I'm not going to make it for you. But when you make that decision, make the best use of the time. Be my messenger. And so that was, just an interesting experience for me. So I eventually, a couple weeks later, decided on coming to Ohio. It was really hard to decide, especially knowing that Evan and Kayla had invested so much in me. But I felt like it was the right decision. And so I showed up after my student teaching had ended. I had Christmas with my family, and then the next day flew out here, drove out here, but we flew. And it was Jay Frisbee and I, the band back together, coming out to Ohio. And I have been super appreciative for my time here so far. It has been an absolute blast, and I've learned so much, and I know I have so much more to learn. So that's the exciting thing for me. Just to hit on a few things that I've learned in my time here. Like the week that I got here, I all of a sudden started having this back issue. It was when I was bench pressing. I didn't really know where it came from. I didn't feel like I strained it. It just felt like it just kind of came up. And that has continued to this day. I've consulted certain doctors. I've gotten multiple MRIs, no answers. And I've done physical therapy 3 different times, and gotten every therapy under the sun, as far as I can tell. And it's still been here with me, and it's gotten much better. It was probably at a 10 pain, but now it's probably at, sometimes it's none. Other times it can get up to like a 5. Between that and then a current health issue that I'm dealing with, I'm having surgery on April 20th. If you could be praying. I think I've learned some about God's sovereignty through our trials. And I think that's helped me grow in my hope, because it talks about suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope won't put us to shame. And so that hope, I think, is one of the qualities that God was wanting for me to grow in. I think I have a lot to grow in that area, but I found that God has taught me more steadfastness through trials with some of the health issues. And then I think in my time in the home, I ended up living with Dave and Sandy for my first year and a half here. And it was just awesome to be able to get time with them in their home, seeing another couple do their thing and live for Jesus. But a couple of things that specifically stood out about my time there was, first of all, Dave's prayer life. If you know Dave, his prayer life is stupid. The guy gets up, he used to get up 4. He gets up at like 4 a.m. or he used to get up at 4. Now he's getting up at 5. He's kind of slacking. But gets up at 5, walks the campus for like an hour and a half, and then goes and has his quiet time for probably another hour and a half. And so that is just super encouraging and convicting. I have not gotten to Dave level with my prayer life, but I do definitely hope to continue to grow that capacity and desire to speak with God on a daily basis. And so, as well as his servanthood. Servanthood is as Dave says, a hallmark of Jesus. And it's one of the things that I find is when people kind of come from the outside, like, man, the service here is just amazing. People just serve so well. And for us, we're like, just fish in water. You can't really, it's just around. It's just in the atmosphere. And it's because of Dave and Sandy. They just model it so strongly that you can't leave there without getting that. And so that was, another super, big thing for me to learn, because I think that, so servanthood is Jesus's thing, or in the same chapter, really a huge thing that he teaches in his chapter about love in John 13. He focuses big time on loving one another. It's he gives the new commandment, and so if we're going to truly love people, I think we need to be servants. So I think that between those things, this servanthood and the sovereignty of God, I've learned more hope, more love through prayer, more faith. some of the core qualities of the center of the Christian life. And then as well as learning to, kind of work with guys, help them do what was done with me, kind of, repay Evan and ultimately Christ, never repay him, but, do what was done with me. I've wanted to invest in guys for a long time, but I think one of the things that early on I kind of failed in was that I was super hard on guys, super hard on them, partially because when I came around Evan, he was pretty intense with me, but it was needed and it was the season for it. He only had 8 months with me, so he knew the time was short. So if he was going to get anything in with me, it was going to have to be like express. And so he kind of described it at one point, was like, I just kept on challenging you and waiting for you to stop coming around, and you just kept coming around. And so I just kept feeding you the rebukes and things like that. And that was needed for me, but I was super hard on dudes really early on, because I thought that was like the only way it could be done was by really like, I'm gonna hold you to a super high standard. And so I think I've learned in that area. One of the things that he's also taught me is that, if I'm doing life and I'm living it, trying to care for the guys that I'm investing in and really shepherd in a loving way, then ultimately God will bring the fruit. The fruit isn't on us. This was something that I was really working through last winter when we went to Fort Bragg just before COVID hit, and we when I was down there, I actually got to talk with Cecil, and Cecil and I were talking about the same thing, and he said, I turned to 2 Samuel 5:12, and I was like, okay, and see if I still have my tab there. I do not. I will show you what I read. In 2 Samuel 5:12, it says, David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. Because he'd asked me, what do you think is a good, the quality about David that God liked? Humility, contrite, And when he told me to turn to that passage, he knew that God had established, not himself, not anything he did, and the reason that God exalted him was for the sake of his people Israel, not for his sake. And so one of the things that had to teach me was, I think that God had to teach me, is when you're discipling guys, it's not for your sake, even though you'll learn a lot through it. But if you're gonna help a guy, I want you to care about him. I want you to care about the guys that I am, letting you shepherd. And I don't think I did really before, and so I had to learn that. And it's something I'm still learning. And then another thing was just that ultimately, it didn't matter how good of a disciple maker I was. It didn't matter how much of the word I knew, or how good I was with people, or even really how good pleased God was with me. That was not related to my fruit. And that was something I had to get out of my head. Deuteronomy 9:4 says, he's talking to the Israelites, and he says, when you come into this land and I cast these people out from before you and let you inherit the land, do not say in your hearts, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, that it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought you in to possess this land. Whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that he's driving them out before you. And so it's not because of my righteousness that God is giving fruit. It's not because of righteousness that God is letting me do anything. It's not because God's pleased with me. If God, allows me to invest in the lives of people, it's because of his goodness and his goodness only, and because he cares about his people. I really had to get that through my head. And so he's been teaching me that more and more. As well as one of the things we talked about this weekend which was wisdom. It talks about in Hebrews 5:14 that those people who are trained, who are mature, they have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. And that's one of the biggest things. This is why I think training takes so long. is because you can't just get the head knowledge. As I've gone through the Bible and read passages over and over, I've gotten some of the knowledge. I know I have a lot more to learn, but I've gotten some of that, and I've seen most passages multiple times. But having the wisdom and how to apply that, when I don't know, a couple is going through marriage counseling and they're thinking about getting a divorce. How do you counsel that? How do you I don't know, counsel a guy who is depressed? I know some of the verses, but like, how do you actually practically work with people? And that's where I think having older men who are able to show you and able to, when you're helping another guy, able to, hey, have you thought about doing this with him? Have you thought about that? Because it's just, there's just so much to learn. And the more I learn, the more I know I don't know. And so I still feel like I'm coming right out of the gates. I still feel like there's like so little I know and so much to learn. And I'm just so excited to be able to continue this journey with Jesus. And so now where I'm at is, it's been about 3.5 years since that November 4th, when I first started getting time with Evan. About 2 years that I've lived here, and I made a commitment to live in Rio for 7 to 10 years total, so at least 5 to 8. And God can change, things. The part of man plans this way, but the Lord establishes the steps. But my every intention is to be in Rio, to get training from Dave, because I know that that time is necessary for me to grow. And I think also for it to become just this fabric of my life, that I'm going to do what Jesus, asks of me. And I think spending my 20s and my 30s focusing in on that under someone else's covering will help me to then survive when I'm out doing it on my own, if God ever leads me away from Rio to ministry elsewhere. I'm not a full-time minister. I'm a PE teacher, so if you ever need me to teach your kids how to play with balls, I'm great at that. But ultimately, my goal is to continue to walk with God, continue to build His kingdom, share with others what the kingdom life looks like, through life on life discipleship, and being able to invest in a few people who will carry on the work. My kind of life verse of sorts is Joshua 1:5, which says, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you." And so I've asked God to do those things with me. First of all, as He says, just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. Just as He was with Dave, I've asked Him to be with me, because I see that God has honored his life, and I want to have that same thing. And then to never leave me or forsake me. And so that is where I am at now. God has blessed me to be able to have plenty of Pauls and Silas's and Timothy's in my life, Dave investing in me, and many of you guys, as well as like Cody and Silas in my life. And then now I'm starting to kind of work with a couple of guys, including Matt and a couple other guys down in Rio, trying to hopefully share with them what that kingdom life looks like, and glorify God by completing the work that He has given me to do. So yeah, that's where I'm at, and thank you guys for letting me share. I really appreciate it.
Do you guys got questions for Matt or Josh on anything that they shared? I mean, feel free to jump in, and if you're online, let us know. We'll take your question too.
I got a question. So in part of your testimony in the beginning, you were talking about, I don't know if it was the I forget his name. Who's the guy that you got help with first on the weekends?
Oh, Evan.
Evan.
Yes.
I don't know if this was Evan. You said you were talking with a guy to get accountability, or a guy was helping you with accountability to get word when you were going through all of these jobs, when you had all these jobs, and were spending most of your day consumed with that. And then seemed like you fell away from that for a little bit and moved to an hour away, right, to pursue more success, right? Am I getting this timeline down?
Yeah, yeah.
Fell back into that idolatry, that success of working all day. And then you got an invite from this guy to come back into this community group for this for the Cecil Bean rally, and he shared, and then Evan was saying, or was it Evan who said, this guy's sinking?
Yes, yeah.
So I wanted to know the difference between, okay, so you said you were quick to obedience. So what was the difference between the time in your life when you made the decision to go to college instead of pursue your training versus when you made the decision to pursue Jesus instead of go back?
Good question. Yeah. So there's multiple people in this equation. So the first one was actually not Evan, it was Max, who he was not holding, we were holding each other accountable to the word. It was kind of my idea. Neither of us had ever read the word before. And so we were like, well, we're terrible at this. Like, we should get accountability. So we didn't really know what we were doing. And then when I was going around that same time, I started going to Evan's Bible study, but no one had ever suggested the idea of like, hey, you should get time with Evan, outside of Bible study, or get time with some. Like, no one had ever brought that to me. I was just kind of attending the Bible study, and I still like, I'm not really sure why that was. It might have just been they knew I was going back to college because I was working in the summer. And when I was pursuing that success in the fall, I was at college. And so I was like, going back to my college to get my degree. And so at the time, the idea of training never was presented to me. It was just a cool Bible study to go to. And I didn't know why these people, I think that they may have never invited me out to like any, hey, you want to get one-on-one outside of this? Even Jay didn't really, other than like that one time we got coffee. After that, it was just come to the Bible study. And so I think part of it was they knew I was going back to college. So they're like, he's probably not gonna be around. And then as well as Evan, I think he knew he only had 8 months. And so I don't know that he ever intended to really start investing in me. I think he thought, well, he's kind of doing his own thing. He's back at college. He's probably not going to be able to get much time. I don't have much time either. And I don't think it was until Jay Preckle said, like, what do you think, that he started to engage a little bit more with me. And then when I asked, like, what can I do? He gave that offer. I was like, okay. And I don't think he expected me to ever take him up on it. So, yeah, I think that was just the first time that I was ever really exposed to the opportunity to like meet with him outside of Bible study. Yeah, there's a lot going on in that time, and yeah, it's like, I'm going from summer jobs to work, college and all that stuff.
Seems like you made a quick decision with your priorities. Like, I want to pursue Jesus, and I want to reprioritize my schedule, quit one of these jobs.
Yeah.
Before it was like, okay, this success is more important. So I didn't know if there seems like there was a trigger with some of these guys that kind of helped you. Vision what God was trying to do with you.
Yeah, I think that was the big thing, was that like someone was offering to help. That I was empty and I knew it, but I didn't know where to go from there. I didn't know who could help. I knew these guys were having a Bible study, but I didn't really understand what they were trying to do. It hadn't clicked in my mind. And then when that offer came, I need help, and I probably need it more than I need the money. And so, if you're willing to help, I don't know what you're going to do with me, but I know it's better than what I'm doing right now. So, yeah.
Where you were wasn't going to get you spiritual. Why was that such a important decision? Really, what in that 8 months did you do? And what was like the one thing you did?
Yeah, so with Evan and Kayla, I think that the thing that stuck out the most was I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about in the Bible. Like, this is it. Like like when I'm reading, you hear about in Acts and the New Testament church, I was like, they're doing it. Like, and this is the only time I've seen it. And very quickly, I realized, like, yeah, we should dedicate ourselves to the word. That's, and no one had ever taught me that. The church I came from was very cheap grace kind of oriented. And so I never really even taught much about obedience. And so when they're teaching me these things, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. The wheel, if you've seen it, the idea of communing with God through word and prayer, and then, helping others through, fellowship and evangelism, obedient to Christ, him as the center of your life. I think just seeing their example that not only did they know the word, but that their life aligned with the word in like every area that I could tell. And it's like, these guys are living it on a daily basis. Like, I don't know anyone doing that. And so that was pretty cool to be able to see that, because it was foreign to me. And I just realized really quickly, like, this is not anything that many people are doing out here. And while I had, Christian and Jay after that, some guys that they had discipled, still in Cape Cod, I felt like we were kind of still, even though they may have been a little further along than me, they were still in kind of my area of the faith, and I wanted somebody to continue that, because I knew that even among the pastors in my area, and a couple of good ones that I knew, that none of them were going to be able to provide me that life on life that I needed. And then as far as Rio versus Alabama, I think the biggest thing between Rio and Alabama was that I knew that Evan and Kayla were going to leave in another 4 years. And so I knew I needed more than 4 years, and I didn't want to be stuck in Alabama after they left, and I'm rooted, in a job or something out there. I have to pick up again and leave. And so I think that was the biggest thing. I was like, well, I think Dave's probably he's not going anywhere. He's been here about 40 years, and he's probably here to stay. So that was probably the biggest difference.
So those are two things that I think it's really hard to prioritize training in Jesus over other things. So what made you realize so early that it's like almost a decade potentially to submitting to another person?
I think initially it was because they told me I had to, and I believed them. Like, anything, the guy walked on water, man. Anything that he said, I believed, just because anytime I asked a question, he had like a Bible verse for it. And so it was like, well, I mean, he knows better than I do. But then, as I started to grow and understand this, I saw that this is biblical. And Jesus spent 3 years, 24/7 with his disciples. And so 3 years sounds like a long time, but again, 24/7. It's estimated that Elijah and Elisha spent somewhere between 6 and 10 years together. I've heard it said that before Timothy was sent out on this first kind of trip himself, for his first assignment himself, he spent 14 years with Paul. And I think about Joshua and Moses, and that was like 40 years in the making. So all these guys who were able to make a profound impact on the kingdom were trained for a long, long time. And then it was also described to me like, okay, people move for jobs all the time. People are like, oh, I'm going to this different city, I'm going to New York to get, this job. Why not move for your Christian life? Why not be willing to do that for your walk? And I wanted to make that the most important thing in my life. I didn't want it to be my job, even though I idolized success for a while. I think once I realized that was not filling, was done with it. And now it's, as much as I love being a PE teacher, but I work to live and I don't live to work. Hopefully my principal doesn't see this. And so, I love it. I work hard at it. But yeah, my first and foremost mission is to follow Jesus. And then yeah, the idea of prioritizing training over a job, all this is going to fade away, all your work. The only work that will not fade away is the work that is not burned away in the fire when God ultimately tests your work, as he talks about in 1 Corinthians 3, fun passage to read. So yeah.
Brought up, I think it was in the Ephesians verse, but I love it. The suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope. And you shared with us some of that suffering. So I'm thankful for the vulnerability, but like I wanted to ask you if there was any other ways that God's tested you and put you through things, or maybe it was something else besides physical, how you've been tested, and some words of encouragement that produced that endurance, that character, that hope, that faith from enduring through the suffering.
Yeah, as far as like hardship, like that's probably the only like thing I could really call suffering. But as far as like hardship or maybe a trial, one of them was when I first came here. There was a PE position that was open in Dave's school district. So I had Dave as a reference, and he's like super well known, and one of the principals, and like another principal, and like I did amazing in my interview, and they even told me after the interview I did a great job. And like I actually worked with the principal who interviewed me that year during summer school. Like I saw him the day before at work and the day after, and we were really closely. And I was like, I'm getting this job. Like I'm definitely getting this job. And I didn't get this job. And then there was another job came up at Rio, and I was like, well, maybe God wants me to work at Rio and recruit kids to the campus. That'd be a cool ministry opportunity. And I interviewed for that and didn't get that. Like those were the first 2 interviews I'd ever like not gotten the job on. So I was like, what is going on? Like I'm gonna have to work as a substitute again, and like substitutes don't make like any money. And so I was like, this is gonna be tough, because eventually David's saying they're gonna kick me out of their house, and I'm not gonna have any money. But I eventually got a job in the DD field, and that I think actually really helped me gain some experience with individuals with disabilities, which I think was really good for me. Just as a person, and then also on my resume as well. And then that ended up getting me an opportunity next year to interview for the current position that I'm at, teaching at Washington Courthouse, where literally we're talking about the superintendent, the principal, the vice principal, the AD who I work with as the tennis coach, all the janitor, the custodial staff, like many of the teachers I work with, my mentor teacher, all Christians. They have a Bible study Wednesday mornings before, like, I mean, some of them are open, really open to growing in faith. And I think that like God took that year and said, okay, you're going to learn a few things about my sovereignty, and then you'll get a job in the field. And I'm going to put you where I want you. But we need to wait another year before that can happen. And I'm super grateful to be part of the school district. God has just put me with so many believers in the school district. I think that we can really make an impact on the school and the kids, as we already have. So that's been a real encouragement to me. And then as well as I just received a lot of resistance from some people when I left home. There were some people within the community of believers I was in, not with Evan's group or anything, but within another community that I was a part of, as well as my family and things like that. They were like, why do you have to go? And really did not, like, very opposed to my decision, and thought I was like joining a cult. And so I think, yeah, that was something that was kind of a trial for me, kind of working through that. But yeah, I guess the only encouragement at the end of the day is like, God's gonna make you more like Jesus, man. Romans 8:28 and 29, talks about uh, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for their good. For those who are called according to his purpose. I don't know if anyone knows 29, but it says something to the effect of, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined that they may be conformed to the image of the Son. Check me on it if you don't believe me. But check me on it anyways. But yeah, Romans 8:28 and 29. Basically, what I believe the thrust of that verse is he says, like, if he predestined you, you will be conformed to the image of his Son. And 28 is that all things work together for your good. And I think when you look at those in light of each other, I think it's like a lot of good and bad stuff is going to happen in your life. And it's okay because he's going to make you more like Jesus in the middle of it. So just because he says good doesn't mean that's necessarily a definition of good. I think he'll produce good in you. So I think that's, like, dude, you're going to become more like Jesus in the process. That's pretty encouraging.
So I guess it produces that faith, because if you triumph through that suffering, you'll be able to see clearly at the other end when you get done what God did.
Yeah. Like, we're supposed to suffer. Like, this is something I have to remind myself all the time. 1 Peter 4:12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening. Like, this is normal. It's not strange. It's supposed to happen in the life of the believer. The crucible is for silver. I had this quiet time recently. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests hearts. So silver was meant to be tested by the crucible. Gold was meant to be tested by the furnace, and your heart was meant to be tested by God. So deal with it. One more thing. It's just a topic I love because it's new to me. But is Jeremiah 12:5. This is one thing that God's kind of spoken to me on a couple of times. Jeremiah 12:5. Jeremiah's complaining. He's had a tough lot in life. And he's basically like, says to God, like, I know that you'll be righteous when I complain to you, yet I'm going to do it anyways. Why do the wicked prosper? And like, why am I stricken like all the day long? And God responds, he doesn't even answer his question really. He's like, if you've raced with men on foot and they've wearied you, then how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land you're so trusting, what will you do in the thicket of the Jordan? So he's basically like, I put you in a couple of easy spots, actually. And so if you can't handle this, man, I had a plan for you, but I don't know how you're going to handle it, man. And so that's kind of been the thing for me, even recently, is like, toughen up. I need to just, toughen up, Buttercup, get up, shake it off, so that's my experience with that.
So one last question. Do you guys look at your life, and as you guys go to places, whatnot in life, as you made those decisions to say, I know we use that word training, but really what we're talking about, it's really a life dedicated to learning and growing with Christ and having others who have kind of gone through some of the journey before us help us through where we're at in that phase of life. So what were some things, or what are some things that you guys encourage, young guys and young ladies who are trying to say, I really want to have a more in-depth relationship with Christ? What were some things that you guys decided to do, or some things that you would encourage others to do in the process?
I think you always need to have a call in your life. Paul being that Hebrews 13:7 man I mentioned, someone you can look up to and you want to imitate their faith, but it's not a one-way street. You need to also be trying to reach out into the lives of training through constant practice. You need to be practicing these things and not just talking about them. But you have to be a student of God's word, or else you're not going to get anywhere.
I think for me, one of the things was mentally burning the boats. There's kind of that, many of you probably heard of it, that one of the Spanish conquistadors came to Mexico, burned his boats, basically communicating to his men, we're here for life. And that's one of the things that I think, especially leaving home was for me. And coming to Ohio, it's like, if you're not here to do this thing, then there's no reason to be here, because it wasn't like I had any plans to come to Ohio prior to this. So I think it helped that this was what I was here for. And if anything else, I remind myself, if I ever get distracted or don't feel like I want to put forth full effort, it's like, well, if you don't want to do this thing, like, go back. Like, you don't even need to be here. You shouldn't be here if you're not going to do this. And I don't want to go back. There's nothing back there for me. So I think, like, to use like a gambler's term, putting the chips in the middle of the table, saying, I'm going for broke. This is all I've got. And kind of doing what the 3 in Luke 9 were unwilling to do, just kind of give it all for Jesus. And I think God honors that, putting forth that, because I think at a certain point it just starts to become harder and harder to turn back. It's like, I've wasted so much time doing this already. If I'm just gonna go back to the world and do what I was doing before, like I think Cecil talks about it, that if you ever were to turn back, you'll have a nominal experience in the world at best. Nominal being it's not going to be great. You should have enjoyed it while you had the chance before, because at this point it's not going to be that. It's not going to be as good as it could have been. So might as well follow Jesus at this point.
We appreciate you guys coming up and sharing. I think I can relate to, when I made the decision that I'm going to go to Fort Campbell and I'm going to go because I want to be around some guys who really focus on living Christ's word support. Like, I can relate to the, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? It's crazy. So I think we appreciate you coming up and sharing. We'll hang out. If you guys got questions, or you guys want to just play pool or shuffleboard or whatever it's called, curling there, or be careful with Addison throwing darts. But outside of that, but we'll kind of pray and end. And again, if you're around this weekend, Saturday at noon, we'll hang out at 16-bit and just hang out and play some arcade games, eat, all that kind of stuff. So I'll pray for us and then we'll close it up. So Father God, I just thank you for working in our lives. Your word says that you're constantly at work in our life. You desire to be at work in our life. I thank you for these 2 men. Father, they're examples of your work and your desire to help us grow in our relationship and understanding of your Son, and most importantly, you, Father. I just pray that you would encourage us to focus on you, and that, Father, we would dive deep into your word, and that we would learn to understand your word, your will, and your way. In Jesus' name. Amen. So.
Oh, guys, appreciate it.